Hey everyone, this is Jay Shetty and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So many of you have been asking me, Jay, how do you read so many books? How do you get through them? What's your strategy? What's your approach? Do you even sleep? The answer to all those questions is in this video. Now, how many of you have a stack of books that's taller than you that you really want to read this year, this month, this week, and it just keeps growing? And you keep looking at your schedule and thinking, I've got less time this week than I had last week. And maybe you're thinking, I don't even know where to start.
Yeah, I don't think I can relate to that. I never had that problem. Okay guys, in all seriousness, I feel like anyone who reads at all can relate to this problem of having just too many books piling up. Let's be real, like it is pretty much impossible to get to all of those books. One person who has kind of become infamous for tackling this problem head on is called Jay Shetty. And Jay Shetty is a really big public speaker, YouTuber. Check him out if you have never heard of him before. Personally, I have only recently started watching his videos. Now, one video that particularly stood out to me is the video where he talks about how he read 365 books in 365 days, which obviously is completely insane. But I figured, okay, this guy, he has read all these books and he says he does not continue to read at this ridiculous pace anymore, but he still says that he reads one book every week or two. So I figured, okay, this guy has got to have some good book recommendations out there. You know, just send him my way because I can use some good book recommendations, you know? I don't want to just read his book recommendations because I don't think that's really the spirit of what he is all about. If you look more into Jay Shetty, what you'll find is that how he is able to read so much is basically because he doesn't read the book. He does like some hardcore skimming. He does not read the book cover to cover. So, I mean, it's a little bit of an overstatement to say that he's reading a book a day because I'm gonna be honest, that's not what he's doing. But I still think there is something to be gained from this method. What I'm gonna be doing in this video, I'm going to try to find 5 of his book recommendations and I'm going to try to read them like he does. I'm gonna be honest. For a guy who supposedly read 365 books in a year and continues to read a book a week, it is like pretty much impossible to find a consolidated list of his recommendations. So I had to do a little bit of digging to find these recommendations. The first book that I actually heard him reference on his podcast about reading. So in the 30-minute podcast, he only mentioned 1 or 2 books. And the one that he seemed to really like the most was called Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely. The next 4 books, found this video he did where he did an office tour. And I was like, you guys, gold right there. Because in his office tour, he walks by his bookshelf and he spends a few minutes pointing out books that he liked. So I'm like, okay, if you're not gonna do a book recommendation video, then this is as close as I can get, you guys. First one he mentioned is Factfulness. This is a book he said he's reading currently. The second book he talked about was Thinking Fast and Slow. The 4th book he had on his list was a book called Rethink. And then the 5th book was the Bhagavad Gita, which I feel like I should know more about what this is. I think it's the beginning of Hinduism. So yeah, that is the 5th book that he explicitly recommended and said it was one of his most important books of his life and had a prized position on his bookshelf. So those are the 5 books that he specifically recommended. I'm going to read these books as Jay Shetty himself would read them. And his first thing that he talks about is that reading should not be a slog. You should read them because your passion is guiding you towards those books. And because of that, I know this is a book about Jay Shetty's recommendations, but I'm gonna narrow down this list of which ones I'm going to read by using Jay Shetty's own advice and cross off the ones that I think are just not interesting or I just have no feeling of like passion that's driving me towards those books. So because of that, I think I'm gonna cross off the Thinking Fast and Slow book. I'm pretty sure that I have read this book before. It's not calling to me. And the second book that I'm gonna cross off is the Bhagavad Gita. I'm gonna be honest, you guys, like I don't have it in me today to have my whole day devoted to that book. So yeah, sorry. The next thing that Jay Shetty says that you should do when you're trying to pick a book to read is don't just dive into the book. Like, you don't want to judge a book by its cover and just like throw it open and start reading. What he recommends is to go online, go on YouTube, and find TED Talks or other videos by the author of the book to try to get a better sense of what is their philosophy on life, what is their big idea that they're expressing in this book. This is just a way to like screen out books that are not worth your time. So that is what I have teed up next on our agenda here. So first video that we're gonna watch is one from the authors of Factfulness. So let's see what they have to say.
The Gapminder Foundation has tested the general public in 14 countries with fact questions about the state of the world. The results were absolutely terrible. Even worse than we expected. Among 12,000 people, the vast majority got almost all the questions wrong, as you will see in the book. It seems like people are suffering from an overdramatic worldview. They think the world is in much worse shape than it actually is, and this leads to terrible decisions and tons of unnecessary stress.
So Factfulness it's kind of speaking to me a little. I like the premise of this book is like using the data to tell a real story of the world. It's not about sensationalizing things and making it all about like the negative press, the headlines, but really showing more of the advancements of society and economies and health and all that stuff. So yeah, I think it's not like a complete home run yet. I guess we'll have to compare it to the other books. Next up, I found a video that Jay Shetty himself, he's featured in it. So I feel like, this has got to be the video I picked. But basically, Jay Shetty in this video interviews the author of the book Rethink. In this following clip, the author talks a little bit about what the book is about. So check it out.
I've mentioned a bit about ideas, but I'd love for you to talk about the idea of the book to our audience and introduce it to them.
Yeah, so the idea of the book is really to do with how we conceive of ideas and whether a new idea is necessarily a good one. And, in the course of my work, I started collecting stories. One of the earliest things I realized was, we like Elon Musk and Tesla, electric cars are the wave of the future. I didn't know till I was researching this book that in the late 1890s, there was a fleet of electric taxis operating in Manhattan. And for a couple of decades, people thought the electric car was going to be the future 120 years ago.
I don't know, you guys. Like, that book also sounds kind of interesting to me. But let's check out the third book. So the third video I found is from Dan. I thought it was Ariely. It's Ariely. And he had a TED Talk about his book, Predictably, Irrational. So let's check out some highlights here.
I think it's worthwhile to think that our basic idea about human motivation is that we think about people like rats. People don't like to work. If we were left to our own accord, what we would be doing, we would be on a beach somewhere sipping mojitos. But the basic motivation is to enjoy leisure and not work, and everything else is just a distraction from it in order so we can do that. And it's a fine model, but we should ask ourselves, is this really a correct depiction of human motivation? Is this really what gets us to act and to do things?
Basically, it sounds like that book is all about motivation and like the techniques by which people are motivated. People may not respond to incentives or motivation how you think they would or in like a rational way. So now that we've started the reading process of all of these books, it's time to actually get to the books themselves. So I think of those three, the one that is speaking to me most is Factfulness, because it sounds like it's going to have more information about general knowledge and it's going to be more applicable to my life, I guess. I feel like I'm kind of going like just off a hunch here, but I feel like it'll give me more like well-rounded view of the world, and it's not as specific to like very specific, interesting psychological phenomenon, history phenomenon kind of things. It seems more general. I don't know. That's my impression from watching those like small videos, but yeah, let's get into the reading. Basically, Jay Shetty, he says you should listen to books on a super fast speed, which I do already. After that, you should just kind of skip around and read like what is speaking to you. Then I'm going to follow up with you with the verdict of this reading technique. So I have just finished reading the book Factfulness, and basically this is an 8-hour audiobook roughly. I listened to it on double speed, and I followed a lot of the techniques that Jay Shetty talks about, where basically you listen to like the beginning and the end of things, and you kind of like skip some stuff in the middle, and you read the things that are most interesting and kind of skip the stuff that's not interesting. And here are my thoughts on the approach. I think the benefit of it is I did get through the book super quickly. It's an 8-hour audiobook. I listened to it on double speed, so 4 hours, and I probably only actually listened to about 1 hour of the 4 hours, so like 25% of the book. I listened to the whole first chapter in its entirety. After that, basically what I did is I would listen to the first maybe like 5 minutes of the chapter, and then I would wait until there was like a natural breaking point. So like oftentimes it would start off with like a little story or something. So I would wait to a natural breaking point, and then I would skip to the last like 2 minutes of the chapter, and I felt I was able to get the gist of what was happening. Like I felt like I did walk away with the key highlights of what I needed to know from the book. Basically, the main takeaway from this book is that data is often used in a sensationalized way. Don't take data at face value. More often than not, there's more nuance than what the numbers that are portrayed in the media or in, the headlines. There's more to it than that. So would I recommend this method of reading? Personally, I would not continue doing it myself, and I'll explain why in a second. However, I think for some people it could work. I think this method is good if, number one, you have access to low-cost books through your library or through a service like Scribd. Personally, I use Scribd, which is just like a monthly fee and you get unlimited access to audiobooks. The selection is not as good as some other services, but they do have a lot of stuff, and they did have this book. So I do have a Scribd referral code, which I will put down in the description box. And number two, you aren't really looking for the full reading experience. You really just want to take away the highlights, and you don't like reading. If you're someone who doesn't really like the reading experience and you just want to get the highlights as efficiently as possible, I think this method is actually pretty good to just get the highlights and walk away with, honestly, the gist of the book. Obviously, this just works for nonfiction, but I think it worked pretty well, honestly. And I was able to get through an 8-hour audiobook in just 1 hour, and I felt like I retained a lot of it. So yeah, that I would say is the main benefit. And I think if that sounds interesting to you, then I would potentially check out using this method. For me personally, I don't think I would continue it. It kind of felt like cheating to me. I'm going to be honest. Like, I am not going to mark this book as read on GoodReads. Like, I can't. Like, I feel like I need to actually read the book cover to cover to really consider that I've read the book. So yeah. My second big problem with this method is basically what he advocates is after you've gone through this whole process, then you decide if you want to read the book cover to cover. So basically you're doing all these methods to narrow down and to make the process faster. So by pre-screening the books, skipping past parts, just reading the first and ending parts of paragraphs or chapters, that whole method is supposed to save you time. And if you then have to go back and read the whole thing cover to cover, you're going to end up spending more time than if you would have just read the whole thing cover to cover to begin with, and you skipped the whole pre-screening, you skipped the whole like skipping around, because if you go back and read the whole thing again, it's going to take you way longer than if you just sat down from the beginning and just read the whole thing. Finally, I think the main problem for me is I like the reading experience. Basically, Jay Shetty says, don't judge a book by its cover. Like, you want to do this like research where you read the reviews, you watch the TED Talks, you do all this stuff in advance. And I think for some people that may work. Personally, I don't like that. I like to judge a book by its cover. I like to go into books kind of blind, to be honest. I feel like that is fun. It's fun to like pick up a book because it looks interesting and not quite know where it's going to lead you, and just absorb it for what it is. Like, is it going to be a little bit repetitive? Probably. Are there going to be some areas where maybe you could have skipped? Yeah, probably. But for me, I don't think it's a method that I would continue long term. And yeah, that's it. I hope you found these recommendations interesting. Let me know if you would ever consider trying out a method like this. And that's it. Bye, guys.